Alpha!
Ay, 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 ay.
Mastodon!
Pterodactyl!
Triceratops!
Saber-tooth tiger!
Tyrannosaurus!
Hello everyone and welcome to Power Rangers Mega Battle. I was on the PlayStation Store and there was this, or Mother Russia Bleeds, so of course I picked the Power Rangers one. Let's see how that panned out. Because I bought the Day 1 edition, I get the White Ranger. I don't know if the White Ranger is unlockable for other people, but he didn't cost any extra, so what do I care? There are 6 worlds in total, but this is the only time we're going to be seeing the selection screen. So there's no, like, voice acting or anything in this game, and the story is largely forgettable. But hey, welcome to the tutorial. We have a 3-hit combo, and we can dodge by tapping the right stick left or right. And that's all we can really do in this form. Bit of an odd tutorial, considering the game doesn't really explain anything else. Hey look, it's the Putties. They got a bit of a goofy redesign for this game, but I actually like how they turned out. So as I said, in this form we really only have the 3-hit attack. It's really not a lot to work with, but it's good enough to kill these most basic enemies, and right here I try to show off the block, but a tutorial pop-up rudely interrupts me, which cancels my block out, but that's okay because we're not going to block ever again for the entire rest of the game. Blocking is fairly useless. I'm more of an evasion kind of person anyway, so unless I absolutely need to block, that's not going to be what I go to. In addition to our 3-hit combo, we can do an air attack, where we drop down onto the enemy's head, which briefly knocks them over. This is good when we're fighting multiple enemies, because we don't want all of them ganging up on us. So when that blue power meter under our health is full, we can morph using the R2 button, and we're going to be spending most of the game morphed because, well, that tends to stick around. It doesn't really go away unless you die, and it's kind of hard to die in this game. Anyway, in our new form, we can now juggle enemies into the air using an uppercut. In our base form, we couldn't do that, and the uppercut's going to be our best friend for a while. It's the easiest way to deal large amounts of damage to the enemies, and you can easily juggle more than one enemy at a time. Now, when I say it's hard to die in this game, I don't mean that you don't take significant damage, it's just that usually the enemies are very easy to dodge. They all make ooga booga noises before they attack, and then you can just jump into the air or double jump if it suits you better. I guess if you really wanted to, you could use the block instead, or, you know, the dodge, but there's no reason to do that because jumping gives you far more invincibility. And from the air you can even land on some of their heads. So now we're introduced to putties with shots, and these guys can get a little bit irritating if you let them gang up on you, which is why we knock them over. They can only shoot straight forward, they can't shoot up in the air, or diagonally, or anything like that. So as long as you're not standing directly in their line of sight, you're fine. You might have guessed that this blue bar underneath our health has more than one function, and that's correct, but we haven't unlocked that function yet, so let's not worry about that until we do. We could unlock it fairly early in the game, but I'm trying to save it, because unless you don't want me to have anything to talk about, that's ideal. So as you saw, it's very easy to knock enemies into each other, but it's still preferable this early into the game to juggle them. You can still knock them into each other from the air when they're being juggled, it's just less easy. You still deal more damage in the end by using the juggle combo, and while you're in the air, you're invincible to any ground attacks, so juggling still wins out, like, all of the time. You might have noticed that sometimes we pull a sword out and start slicing the putties. The sword is our heavy attack used with triangle, and it requires our stamina meter, that yellow bar underneath the blue one. It refills pretty quickly, but not quickly enough that we can spam it. This early in the game we can incorporate it into our punch combo, but it doesn't have a combo to call its own yet. We can buy an upgrade to fix that later, but we haven't seen a single upgrade terminal. Which is good because we haven't even leveled up once. It takes a while to gain our first level. In case you're wondering, the different colors of putties do have different attacks, but you don't really have to worry about that because all of them can be jumped over. One of the putties does have an air attack where they do a dive kick towards you, but even that can be jumped over, unless you jump at a really inopportune time. So if there's one thing you should be taking away from this, it's that being in the air makes you practically invincible to normal putties. You might have seen us grab a few enemies, but I won't explain that until it's actually important. But grappling is definitely not the most efficient method to deal with any of the enemies we're facing currently. There's a lot of health, considering this is just the first level. Now we have learned to double jump by surprisingly double tapping the jump button. The double jump can be useful to dodge attacks or for the rare platforming section, but it's really not necessary for fighting putties. There's nothing you can do from a double jump that you couldn't do from a normal jump, and there are no enemies that high most of the time. You might have gotten a little bit excited by the change in elevation. I certainly did, but that rarely factors into the gameplay. I can actually only think of a single part where the change in elevation is relevant to anything, and that's because you come across it while you're not in your Power Ranger form. For now, it's just a whole ton of more basic putties, and we deal with them the same way we always have this far, by jumping into the air over their heads. In case, on the off chance you're wondering which of these putties is the most dangerous, it's the one that punches you, because he actually starts a kind of significant combo that takes off a little chunk of your life. You can see we got hit, and there's, what is that, 1/6, 1/7 of our life missing? It's not a lot, but it's more than the others. You may have noticed that unlike our punch combo, our sword doesn't really knock enemies over yet. That is something we can also change by upgrading it. Of course we can mix our sword into our punch combo to knock enemies over, but we haven't seen that yet. And you might not see it because it's not all that convenient to use. It kinda looks cool though. I didn't really pay attention to this game's backgrounds previously, but it's good that there's a carnival or fair or whatever you want to call it in the background because it's actually foreshadowing for the next level. While we're sort of talking about the game's art, I think the art is serviceable. I imagine it would remind a lot of people of phone games, and that might not be to your liking, but I think it's relatively inoffensive, and I like the redesign of the putties and some of the other major characters, like Rita. The art style does make it a little bit difficult to tell exactly when and where I should be hitting something, and I'm not a big fan of the hit detection in general, but it's also serviceable. It can be more difficult to deal with these ranged putties when they're surrounding you, but if we don't have time to knock them into the air with an uppercut, we can always just bounce on their heads like I demonstrated previously. Knocking them over with an air dive doesn't deal a lot of damage, but it's a lot quicker than the other ways you can knock them over, aside from maybe your blaster. The blaster knocks most enemies over and deals significant damage, but it does use some of our blue meter, and we're going to want that later. So to that end, I try to make sure that I don't use the blaster too much, even though it can be mildly helpful in some situations, and I do only mean mildly. If there's one thing you could call difficult about this battle, it's that part of the screen is obscured for some reason. But even then, you're unlikely to die right now. Now, to this guy, you might actually die the first time. He has a shield around him, and in order to break the shield, we need to do that air dive we did on the previous putties. It briefly breaks his block, long enough for one solid combo. And after we're done with that solid combo, we want to run away, because his sword and his melee attacks in general deal significant damage. He even has a combo of his own. We just want to keep our distance and move up or down when he gets too close. Yeah, the blaster really does deal decent damage. It's a shame that we're not going to use it too much. So when I said that the next stage was going to be a fair, I meant one of the next stages. It's going to be a while, but it'll happen. Anyway, this level has an environmental hazard in it, and this game doesn't have a lot of those, and it doesn't have too many selling points in general, aside from, I suppose, the 4-player co-op. So I'm going to show off this level in the best light I can, and let the putties get run over by the cars as many times as possible. Sadly, you can't throw the putties into the cars or hit them into the cars. They have to be standing perfectly upright for the cars to hit them, which seems like a wasted opportunity. I mean, you don't do a lot with the grab in this game, so it would really help if you could throw them into the cars. That would add to the enjoyment of this level significantly. I mean, you can throw putties into all the other environmental hazards in this game, so this one should be made to match. Now, we actually kind of have to stand on the road during this section, unless we're in this small part of the sidewalk up here. But camping out in the small part of the sidewalk is not a good way to get the putties run over by cars. And believe me, I'm trying. But sometimes the game has weird ideas about hit detection. Some really weird ideas. Thankfully, your patience finally pays off, and I get 3 of them in a row. I don't know how much damage exactly those cars deal, but it's not a significant amount that killing them only with the cars would be worth your time. The most convenient way to take them out still is with that basic mid-air combo we've been doing so far. It's also a good way to build your combo meter, which in turn fills up that blue bar underneath our health, which we still don't have a use for yet, aside from our blaster. I have wondered if in multiplayer perhaps they add more enemies, or if it's the same amount of enemies. Considering how many hits the enemies take, if it were the same amount, that wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. But that would also mean that not all the players would have something to do with every time. Even if I could play cooperatively, which I can't because PlayStation 4 controllers are expensive, I just tend to play beat 'em up single player unless there's something I absolutely need to see in co-op. You know that sign on the left doesn't even say anything on it? I always thought that was a weird artistic choice when signs were intentionally left blank, but they're clearly meant to say something. Perhaps that was just a rough concept art for a sign and they ran out of time. That might make sense. You see, they blew all their budget on car models because there are a significant variety of cars. There's even a taxi. So maybe you're starting to think that this car section is getting a little bit old with me talking about signs and whatnot. Well, the game agrees with you because we're just about to encounter something new. Now, we couldn't get a good glimpse of what caused all this destruction because of the camera angle, but presumably Tommy saw it and he just isn't saying anything. I wouldn't fret too much though, because something tells me it's going to be the boss fight here in a minute. So again, I was at first a little bit excited by this change in elevation, but it doesn't really do anything to the game design. Using the basic uppercut combo is still as safe as ever, and there's really no reason to do anything else at this point. The reason you see me doing other things is simply for the sake of variety. If nothing else, the art of this destroyed road is nice, but that's about it. After a few unreasonably unremarkable waves of enemies, we come across a mostly intact parking garage for some reason, even though this was just ahead of that road that was completely annihilated. We do get a new hazard in this area in the form of these electric mines that only hurt us when they're active. For some reason, they have an inactive period, even though we can easily jump over them. Honestly, they should probably just be turned on all the time. As for this wall, we simply need to blow it up either with our fists or our sword, but other enemies will try to attack us while we're doing so. If we're really adamant about it, we can lure enemies into the mines where they will take significant damage, but not significant enough to be worth it. Not only do the mines turn on and off, which means that you have to lure them at just the right time, but our uppercut combo is still free. Doesn't cost anything to use, and we can trigger it immediately. I guess you could always throw the putties onto the mines, but that's still slightly more inconvenient than just attacking them straight up. It's time to face off against that mysterious monster that we saw earlier. And it's a re-envisioned King Sphinx, the monster that has appeared the most in Power Rangers merchandise, at least in Mighty Morphin Power Rangers merchandise. He only has two basic attack phases. He fires at us, and he tries to crush us. Both of these are incredibly similar, because both of them put giant circles on the ground so you know exactly where to avoid. However, we can only hit him during his second phase. Dodging out of either attack is as simple as pressing, well, the dodge stick either left or right a couple of times. You have plenty of room to dodge, and the worst thing you can do during this fight is jump upward into the attack. You can freely use your blaster, sword, or punch attacks to hurt the boss, but I recommend just using your fist most of the time because for some reason, sometimes the sword doesn't seem to register, even though you figure it would be more powerful. The blaster also works perfectly fine if you're not using your blue meter for anything, which during boss fights you shouldn't be. But aside from one boss, I forget that the blaster exists. so most of the time I'm just going to be punching them instead. You know, I can't imagine how one would make these boss fights interesting for multiple people. Does the boss just die way quicker if multiple people are hitting it at the same time? Because there's still a lot of waiting involved regardless of how many people are playing. In my experience with these kinds of bosses, it's usually just one guy who actually gets to hit the boss and everyone else just dicks around for the entire fight. Anyway, after this final phase and these last few hits, the game switches to a Megazord battle mode. And I guess that's neat. It's mostly just for presentation purposes, though. There's no real challenge involved.
Power Rangers!
Before we get to the part where we start actually hitting King Sphinx as the Megazord, we have to do this. And they're all the same, regardless of which boss you're fighting. You charge up and fire at the targets to deal damage to him, and in between that, you shoot the shots that he fires at you to knock them out of the air. I don't know if I would call it insultingly easy. Yeah, it's insultingly easy. I kind of have to struggle to keep myself awake during these segments, because there's not a lot to enjoy here. Like I said, it's mostly for presentation purposes, but the actual Megazord fight does a much better job at that. Jesus, it doesn't even deal significant damage.